And welcome back to Cape Ann today, starting off a new week for you. Now, because of all the early voting that happened over the weekend, we pushed our reporters to today's show. And we have Erica Brown of the Manchester Cricket, Taylor Bradford of the Gloucester Daily Times, and John Penaloza of Rockport Stuff with us today. We're going to lead with Taylor, Heather, who spoke about mailboxes, the chamber move, and the health department's doing some funky testing.
Right. So this week here in Cape Ann, there's been a lot of buzz about the upcoming election, specifically to do with mailboxes. So people started to see the blue USPS mailboxes being picked up and put into beds of trucks and driven away, and kind of voices of the community were concerned that this was in fact meddling with the ability for people to put in the mail-in ballots this upcoming election. However, I was able to speak with Representative Steve Doherty over at the USPS, and he confirmed that that is not the case, as this has also happened in a couple other communities along North Shore, Cape Ann, and beyond, also in Brighton, Massachusetts. And so the discussion has kind of been around why are they getting picked up? There had been some concern as President Donald Trump had made a few comments about not giving additional funding to the USPS during this voting season. And so there were some concerns of what did that actually mean? Were we going to see any actions being taken by the government, by the postal services leading up? But Doherty assured that it's actually what happened was they're actually collecting these boxes to do routine maintenance, switch them out, and actually create, they've changed the slots to be, instead of the pull down handles, they're going to be slots, because there's actually a size requirement that you can't exceed, and they've found that people have been putting mail that should not be shipped through these collection boxes in, which is making it harder for them, exceeding costs such as that. So they have changed the model of these collection boxes. He said the timing of this changeover is just unfortunate. It was not, they weren't anticipating the conversation, the national conversation to go like this during this time, but he said assured that they're actually just doing the routine maintenance. And in addition to changing out the new type of boxes, also sometimes boxes just need to get changed out either because of graffiti, because they're old. They have found that they have 3 mail collection bins all in the same street, and it's actually not super helpful. And so it's what they've been kind of planning to do for a while. And again, it just kind of happened at an unfortunate time in our nation's conversation.
Taylor, you want to chat a bit about the Cape Ann Chamber of Commerce's new home?
Yeah, so I was able to speak with the CEO, Ken Reel, yesterday and talk a little bit about what has been going on over the Chamber of Commerce, because while people have not been going to the Chamber of Commerce, they've been doing a lot for the community, having discussions, having online events going on, while socially distance has kind of kept people away from in-person gatherings. And their newest news is that they have moved to their new address over at 22 Harbor Loop. So if you guys remember, they were over on Commercial Street, but they have now moved, and they've done extensive renovations and refurbishments of the building, making the ceiling higher, opening up the space, creating a welcome space, and actually conference rooms for people of both the community and their members to come and use. So they said if you set up a reservation that you can go and use that space. Now, given COVID guidelines and protocols, that might look different, or they might have maybe a little bit more of an extensive check-in, but Ken said that they are planning to open up this week or next. They're just having a few final touches on their building before they can really put that open flag out front. But he's really excited as they continue to support the organizations and businesses here in Cape Ann.
Yeah, building looks gorgeous. They did great work over there.
Yeah.
All right, finally, Taylor, let's jump into the sewer together.
Yeah.
All 3 of us.
Yeah. So the conversation brings us to the topic of feces, of poop here in Cape Ann. So as the Board of Health and the city's public health department continues to try to figure out how to track COVID-19 here in Cape Ann, they have taken a page out of the book that other communities across the nation have as well, which is testing the sewage or the wastewater in the community. And what that does, it doesn't necessarily track individuals who might have contracted the virus, but it does give them an idea of kind of the community-wide transmission here in Cape Ann and be able to navigate when does that spike, when does that rise, or when is it a little bit lower here in the community. So again, it's not tracking individuals, but it is tracking kind of the community-wide transmission. And it's really fascinating. The conversation's been going on for quite a while. Public Health Director Karen Carroll has been talking both to the school committee, to other people on the Board of Health about how this will benefit Cape Ann and how this might help us in terms of tracking the virus here. And so the general, it'll be able to measure the scope of the outbreak independent from patient testing or hospital reporting. It includes data on asymptomatic individuals as well, so not just those who are showing symptoms, which is very helpful. And then it provides decision supporting for officials when determining the timing of severity of the public health interventions to mitigate that overall spread of the disease. So really trying to get that broader scope and really try to see how can we make decisions faster and sooner, so that businesses can be prepared, that families and schools can be prepared as we kind of have that question of what the fall will hold. So they said that the estimated cost is going to be about 26 weeks of testing, and they're going to do 1 weekly testing over at the Gloucester's water treatment plant or sewage plant, and that will be about $1,000 per test, about $1,200 per test, which accumulates to $31,200 for the entire 26 weeks. And they're hoping to have a really extensive kind of database by the end of this, but they'll also be getting those weekly answers every single time.
So will they be reporting to the public what the results are? Do we know?
So I don't know that. I believe that they'll have the results. And when Karen spoke at a school committee meeting last week, she gave the first update. So I'm sure that the information will be made public or readily available as people have already been asking. And they did their first test 2 weeks ago and came out that there was no transmission through the wastewater. So they already have those results and they're seeing, it'd be interesting to see if there is a spike, how that affects their testing and what that might look like in the numbers. So
it's so interesting. And did you hear about any, I know other cities are, and you mentioned other cities are using this testing already. Have you heard any word on how that's going? Has it been super helpful for them to identify the spikes?
So they showed that it's pretty accurate, and it can show that the virus is actually more prevalent in communities than we're realizing. Luckily here in Cape Ann, that's not the case. In terms of the transmission is low, which is a very good sign, but it has shown in other communities throughout the 42 states that the virus is still around and is still spreading.
So it's probably the most transparent way of reviewing what's happening in a community, right?
Right. And if people are curious to know a lot of the details and the nitty-gritties behind what and how this is done, so the Board of Health and Public Health Department is working with BioBot Analytics, and that's the company. You can go to their website, it's BIOBOT, and that company is the one that they're working with, and that has done this testing throughout other states and communities. But yeah, it's a really detailed science, really fascinating. And if you told me at the beginning of the pandemic that we'd be testing this way, I would not be able to have guessed, but it's really interesting. And I'm really curious to see the outcome come these 26 weeks later.
I just want to repeat what Taylor said, and that this whole science of investigating our sewage and what we find there is really fascinating. Yeah. Sometimes the answers are in the strangest places.
This is true, and we'll be speaking with all of our guests again later on this week. But now we're going to go to John Penaloza. He's the admin for Rockport Stuff, the highly engaging Facebook group, and he's going to talk about a poll where he asked the people in the group, did they want to be talking about national politics? How do you think that went? All right, back again with John Penaloza. He is the admin for Rockport Stuff, and we're happy to announce that John's going to be joining us weekly now to give us sort of the lay of the land in our little nook and cranny of Cape Ann. So how you doing, John?
Good. How are you guys?
Great.
We're good.
All right, Heather, what's this poll that we're talking about today?
Yeah, so I was looking at Rockport Stuff this morning, and I saw, John, that you had put out a poll. I thought it was super appropriate, asking people if they want any sort of national conversation on the Rockport Stuff page, or do they not? Should Rockport Stuff be limited to Rockport government and all things Rockport? Is that right?
Yeah, so to clarify that, it kind of gets in the weeds, but so I've always taken the position that Rockporters should be able to discuss national politics too, as it affects Rockport, right? So some issues are too important and affect everybody in every town, when they affect the whole country, right? So like the presidential race affects everybody, right? So I've been really lenient about that, but lately the presidential race, and politics has gotten so bitter that it's become like meme wars, inside the group, which is what everybody sees all over Facebook. In unmoderated Facebook, you find just the worst stuff, and it turns people off, and people try to scroll by it on their feeds, except the people who love to engage in it, right? So I've been trying to find a way, and people in Rockport stuff keep saying, look, I don't come to this group for that. You're turning off, the 80% of the people who don't want to see this at all. So usually when there's contentious issues like that, I put it to a vote. And the poll said, just until the presidential election is over, how should purely political posts be treated in Rockport stuff? So there, the purely political is where I decide what is Rockport related and what isn't, right? So for instance, there's been a hot topic about the USPS. I don't know if you guys saw like the mailboxes being removed out of Gloucester and people taking pictures, and that was like a hot post that came up, right? So everybody's kind of up in arms about it. And I think that aspect of, it's got a national politics angle, but it's really something that's a locally relevant topic, right? Because in a time of COVID, how are people going to go to the polls? How are seniors going to go to the polls? Because in Rockport, seniors like a huge demographic, right? So if they don't feel safe to vote, how is that going to affect the vote, right? The results. So we put up this poll, and the two options are either to ban all political posts, all purely political posts till after the election, or to continue to allow them, as I've always been kind of permissive about them. And the results were like probably 8-1 against, in favor of banning posts. So 235 votes in favor. That's a big turnout, by the way. So people have a big opinion. I don't usually get that many people voting on a poll.
So it sounds as if we're not going to be seeing memes on Rockport stuff.
Definitely not memes, unless they're memes that are like about the mailbox that got pulled in front of like town hall, right?
Yeah.
Or something like that. It's got to be Rockport related. That's the most important thing, and that's what I found helps the group, maintain authenticity and have local relevancy.
But what I love about that poll is the conversation that ensued, because that is, I think the first time we interviewed you, you recognize the fact that dialogue is so important in this country. And it's a pretty interesting conversation. I mean, it gets a little bit, extreme and edgy, but it's still to witness that conversation is really important in real time in this town. Yeah,
it is. And again, it's an example of how Rockport's just a microcosm of the country with its own particular demographic slice, but definitely people in favor and against. Their implied political position is clear from their commentary. And the hardest thing is just to maintain a medium where they can actually have these opinions going back and forth in a dialogue, right? Or whether it's a confrontational conversation or, strongly at odds with each other. But the hardest thing is to maintain that medium, is to maintain that forum.
John, I had the feeling you're going to have to nudge that date from election day to maybe sometime late January 2021, maybe even beyond.
Yeah, right. I try to be as conservative as possible, but who knows,
Well, very cool stuff. So, so John, is there anything else happening that you want to share with us that seems sort of like a hot button issue in Rockport this week?
People are trying to test the boundaries of how much politics can they slide in as something that's Rockport related or not, right? So my favorite and my least favorite technique is somebody takes a picture of like the old Toad Hall building and then starts a political conversation with a picture of Toad Hall. It's got nothing to do with it, right? So a notice out to all Rockport Stuff members, please don't do that, because that's like my pet peeve, and I'll just ban you for the, out of hand just for doing that.
Well, again, it might be volatile there on Rockport Stuff, but there is still some pretty good discourse happening.
Yeah, and he knows what he's doing. He's handling it really well. So hats off to everyone in Rockport. We'll see what he has for us later this week. Now let's turn to Manchester and Essex with Erica Brown. She's the editor and publisher of the Manchester Cricket, and we're going to be talking about another volatile thing, back to school and how that's going to be dealt with, and elementary parents weighed in.
Well, guys, on Tuesday, there was the follow-up in this ever-evolving kind of this rolling issue of back to school. The Manchester Essex School Committee and the school district hosted what's called a community town hall. 218 people showed up. I'm sure they were nearly all of them parents. And really it was about how to communicate, how to really get people used to a back to school that's going to be all remote, answer all these questions, especially in light of the fact that people don't feel that COVID rates are very high. So people are thinking, why are we doing all remote? And in particular, this zoned in on the most challenging part of the equation, which is elementary school and elementary school parents. It's a real problem. And so they made themselves available to have a pretty exhaustive conversation with them. I think it helped.
And what were what did the parents go home with?
Well, why don't I answer it the other way? I'll tell you what they came with. Most of the parents who came there, being elementary school parents, just came off of a spring that was really difficult for everybody. Imagine this. Last spring, in the middle of March, everyone was told to go home, and then they went to an all-remote program, but the teachers had no training. The district had no experience with this. They were literally caught on the flat-footed. So this time, the elementary school parents who got the worst of it are coming back and saying, listen, last time I had my job, or I work, and these aren't kids that you can kind of send off on their own and into a room and go to school. You have to supervise these children. So how are you actually going to have your own life and attend to your own responsibilities? And if you can't afford it, if you can afford it, I'm sorry, you can bring in help, or you can drop your child off. But what if you can't? It's a really, really hard problem. And so the threshold is very high for the district to sort of find a solution. And, we talked about this last week. Imagine the school district has been trying to find these solutions when they've gotten no information pretty much from the state or federal authorities on how much money they're going to be getting into the district to accommodate these new changes and these new mandates for safety. It's very, very difficult. So I'll just finish answering the question. I'm sorry I'm so long, but they've got the YMCA in, and the YMCA is going to have programming essentially for drop-off for kids. So imagine this isn't really daycare or what it is you drop your child off, and it's supervised or guided supervision for children who are very young to go through their schooling day at the Y. So the Y is already up and running with understanding the curriculum, so they can provide sort of a knowledgeable guided process, and that's supposed to be good enough. But here's the problem. What happens if there's a problem at the Y with COVID?
There was an important ruling from the MIAA recently.
Yeah, last night. It's just hot off the presses. We haven't even really had a chance to research it. We're going to get, I'm assigning somebody to cover it. But the MIAA, which is the school, the scholastic sort of sports arm for Massachusetts, they voted last night apparently to proceed with sports. And this is very interesting, where they can proceed with that vote while school districts are actually deciding to do all remote and to have no programming that's in person per se. So that'll be a really interesting thing to work out, and that's going to play out over the next couple of weeks. I will say this, one thing that's happening is all of these things are happening while the situation is ever changing. It's still happening. It's still evolving. It's still coming into play. So, you know, you have colleges that have gone back to in-person that are changing their minds. You have school systems that are probably going to do the same thing. So it'll be really interesting to see how it plays out in sports. But sports are getting started. I mean, you have the Bruins started, and the Celtics are now starting back again. And I hear people, they're just so excited about it. So, you know, it's happening. It'll be interesting to watch, though. So.
And you have a sports team in Manchester that's doing very well, we understand.
Yeah, well, it's Manchester and Essex, because it's sort of a regional league. The Twilight Baseball League. I don't know if you are familiar with that or if you've ever been to one of their games. Mm-hmm. It's a real comer for people who love it. It's sort of it's an amateur league, but it's a volunteer amateur league. So you get people who, you know, they're really great players in baseball, and so they get together. So the Manchester Essex Mariners, I don't know if you mind me showing the actual front page. It's our lead story. Isn't that a great shot?
Yeah.
But they won and got into the finals last week, or early this week, I'm sorry. And so the finals are going to be happening this weekend and going into next week. I think it's the best of 5 games. I mean, Paul Clark is the one who covered it for us, so I shouldn't be the one speaking. But they had a real come from behind win, and it was a real nice thing to see. And I should say that in this image, I looked very carefully. They're wearing gloves so that they can sort of, you know, be safe and you know, adhere to the right protocols. So.
Well, lastly, Erica, do you want to talk about the recent edition of the Postcards Home? Love that.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for bringing that up. I forgot. This week, Bailey Buchanan, who is a resident of Manchester, she's an attorney. She's an avid hiker, and she's a really good one, too. She has started doing something that's sort of, she called it socially distancing at 1,200 miles or something like that. She's been going up to the New Hampshire White Mountains, and specifically the White Mountain National Forest, which was just named by Fodor's apparently in June as the #1 most beautiful forest in the United States of America. She has actually summited 16 peaks. It's a real, you know, achievement. But she wrote a beautiful story about how this activity of hiking, especially when it's really challenging, is her happy place. And in terms of the amount of the abundance of activities that you can do up there, there really is something for everybody. So not just amazing hikers like Bailey.